All right, welcome to our community conversation series. Last Wednesday night we did the Defusing Hatred Program, and the recording for that program is now on our YouTube channel of the Interfaith Council of Contra, Costa County, and we're co-hosting this with Tri-City Interfaith Council to do the Everyday Peacemaking tonight. And so even though if you missed last week on the Defusing Hatred Program, you're welcome to take a look at that online, and if you'd like the handout that goes with it, which is an introduction to nonviolent communication and interfaith peacemaking information, please email me at interfaithcc, that's 4 C's, at gmail.com. And you're welcome to grab more information about that program that was recorded, and you're welcome to share any of these programs in your Sunday school or religious education programs. Next week, we're not having a general meeting, but if you are one of a few people that are interested in telling a story that you, of an experience that you may have had around discrimination or misunderstanding, then that could be a story that we could use during our Courageous Conversation program. And so our preparatory shorter ability to be able to prepare ourselves for the program itself, which is going to be Wednesday, August 18th. That will be the actual Courageous Conversation program. But if you're interested in being one of the people that shares one of those 4 or 5 experiences that we'll be sharing, so that we have an ability to be able to hear your experience and practice learning for understanding rather than learning for responding, then that's what next Wednesday's session is for. So please talk to myself or Joy Barnitz with the Tri-City Interfaith Council. And Joy, did you want to give us a welcome tonight from the Tri-City Interfaith Council?
Good evening. This is Joy Barnitz, and I'm currently the president of Tri-City Interfaith Council. Welcome tonight, and thanks to all of you for coming, and thanks especially to Reverend McGarvey for putting this series together for us so that it can be available on YouTube to share with others. And I've been thinking about it, and I'm not sure yet whether I have anything that fits the category for our practice on next week, but I'll give it some more thought. I'll put my email in the chat so that you can contact Reverend McGarvey or myself or both of us. Thanks so much.
And thank you, Joy. We appreciate your co-sponsoring with us to be able to help us get this program going. So we'll do a land acknowledgement to recognize the unceded lands of First Nation peoples who have lived here since time immemorial. You may live in San Francisco on Ramaytush, Ohlone, or in Oakland on Chochenyo, Ohlone, or in Crockett, Karkeen language, or in Pittsburgh on Bay Miwok land. Both the Ohlone and the Bay Miwok have a viewed Tuishtak, what we call Mount D, or what the Spaniards called Mount D, and we want to recognize that that they were pushed off these lands and not allowed to even create First Nations or have any of their ancestral lands as reservations because of how the specific way how California and the federal government used cultural genocide and actual genocide to be able to push these people off the land so that they could be used by white people and settlers. So we recognize that we're the beneficiaries of settler colonialism, and we're doing our work to be able to know how to work against the effects of settler colonialism in our own realm. This program is a follow-up to our Defusing Hatred program, which we did last Wednesday, and we're so grateful that you were a part of that conversation, or you can find it on our on our YouTube channel. But tonight, what we're really going to focusing on as much as we can is really looking at our culture of conflict here in the United States and asking the question, how should people of faith respond? How do we go deeper? How do we set boundaries? What are the role of our spiritual practices? And what are peacemaking programs that can help us go a little deeper? And recognizing that we do live in a culture of conflict and competition is an important place to start, because it can lead to a lot of the expectations that we have for conflict in our culture and interpersonal conflict that can come, and the discord between people of different political views and worldviews. And let's just recognize that if there are 325 million Americans, there are really 325 million different worldviews that we each share. And even though for most of our history we've had a common narrative and a civil religion that helps us recognize our similarities, we've also been a culture where forces have encouraged us to forget that we really do know how to talk to each other. So let's recognize that that maybe we do know more about how to treat each other, and maybe we need to just be reminded of that. And of course, some more good questions for us as we consider the culture of conflict that we live in. When did it become okay to speak to each other without respect? And that wasn't always the case. It may have come during the McCarthy, or there might have been at times of pendulum swings back and forth. Some of it might have been the McCarthy season in Congress, but we've seen a steadily increasing level of hate speech and ideological violence. And sadly, they become commonplace. And of course, we don't want our kids to talk like that. But when we hear of the kinds of conversations that are going on in our culture, we recognize that the lack of honoring language and the need for more civil discourse. But we also need to recognize that the words that we can sometimes use that can be a part of labeling others can be a part of an honoring or dishonoring of other people. And so we want to recognize that terms like vermin or animals are being used by people in our civil discourse, our discourse in this country, and it's not always civil. Sometimes folks are using terms like thugs and rapists for other folks. So they're not conservative or liberal words, and we too can participate in abusing others if we lump everyone into such language with the same group. And we need to rename people who use such language in a way that's encouraging other people, and especially anything that's encouraging ideologues, because speech gives permission for violence, hatred, and race baiting. And if we're not a part of the answer, we really can be a part of the problem, even if we don't recognize that. So that honoring language is important, and recognizing how language is being used in our midst. So let's not forget that some of our divisions are because of the breakthroughs of new groups of people and perceived loss of power, especially for women who are breaking into a very male-dominated world, people of color breaking into a very white-dominated culture, and of course sexual minorities. And when we think back on those glory days, sometimes referred to as when America was great, or other phrases like that, that there really was never a golden age. Even the 40s and 50s, when some people thought that all we need to do is return to this idyllic age and everything will be okay. But the 40s and 50s were not a safe place for queer people. It was not a safe place for women. It was not a safe place for people of color. So let's recognize that as well. And so how should people of faith respond? Let's break down the language that's being used. Let's translate the code words for others. Let's continue using honoring language ourselves, even if others give up on that. But let's recognize that the words that people do use matter. And so when we're thinking even of the way our news comes to us, it's put in such a format that it's often pitted left, or we're told that this is a left position versus a right position, as if our news can only handle the complexity of two sides to every issue. And one of the first things that I think we as people of faith that we need to do as peacemakers is to remind folks that there are never just two sides to any issue. I've not found one issue where there's only two sides. There's always 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 sides. to every issue. And if we actually give folks an opportunity to be able to share what they really believe, then we'll actually learn more about the diversities of opinions, diversities of worldview, and that diversity is always greater than just 2 points. And of course, when we can look for what we have in common, we can ask more questions for clarification, but oftentimes we need to help folks understand that there's more than two sides. So sharing our difference with respect for each other's freedom of thought, if you remember last week, that really is the hope for nonviolent communication. Using those 4 steps of observing what we're seeing and hearing, of going deeper and asking questions of clarification about what another person might be feeling, so that we can get to what their needs are. And when we're in conversation with them, we try to get to the level of needs to actually know what it is that they desire and need in that present moment, so that if we do have a request, we can share that request without abusing their free will. So what gets in the way of risking conversation and going deeper with others? Is it because we want to be right more than we want to know how others see the world? Or do we really want to limit our conversations to pretending that there's only 2 sides about each of those issues? So let's think about it and maybe even share what are some of the hardest topics to discuss and why. And I'm going to take us out of the PowerPoint for us to be able to share with each other the answer to that question. What are the hardest topics to discuss and why?
I'll go. Race is one of the most difficult because it's, because nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody knows what to say. People of color really don't know what to say either sometimes because there's so much anger and frustration. And white people just plain don't understand what it's like to be a person of color. You think you do, but you don't. And so there's this level of not knowing on all sides. And so we need to talk and listen to each other, listen and ask those questions, Will, so that we can see that we are all the same. We all want the same comforts in life. And we all want to have a place to live. We want a car, and we want our children to do whatever it is they want to do. We want to have a job. We want to have everything just like everybody else. And because of the teachings that have been around since the beginning of time of this country, it's part of the infrastructure of this country. And people do not realize I've been teaching classes on it now. I'm taking a break because I needed a break, but and during these classes, it's been made very plain to me that white people really just are not aware. I mean, if you grew up in neighborhoods that were all white, and you went to schools that were all white, save for maybe one Black kid or one Latino or Latina, one here and there, or your neighborhoods, there's one here and there. The neighborhoods have, redlining began eons ago, and it still is here. So today most people live in segregated neighborhoods without even realizing it. Look at your neighbors, depending on where you are.
So Zula, do you think the difficulty in race as a topic to discuss is because so much of it is below the surface and most of it is now systemic and institutionalized, or is there something else about race that makes it difficult for folks?
Well, it is systemic, and that's hard for people to understand and to admit, because it hurts, it's painful, and people don't want to go there. So I'm not placing blame on anybody. I'm stating facts. as they are. This is how it is, how we got here. And once we see that and realize that, then we can talk about, okay, where do we go from here, instead of, oh, I'm sorry, God, I feel so bad for you, blah, blah, blah. I don't want your tears. I want change. And everybody that I've spoken to, I mean, it's been amazing to me, the change in people in the classes. I mean, people who were just so unaware. Well, I grew up in Texas in an all-white neighborhood and blah, 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 and I had no idea. I mean, even in the movie theater, this one guy said, even in the movie theater, it was all white. And then I realized, oh, wow, there's a theater over there. That's where all the Black people go, or the people of color. This is now. I mean, this is now. People do not see it, but it's right here now. But
Thanks,
because, yeah, it's separate. It's separate. Yeah. So it's hard.
So what are the other hardest topics to discuss that are out there? Maybe even some that are in your faith community?
So one of the hardest things for me to talk about is actually the overlap in identity factors for people. No person is a simple single identity factor. And supporting what Zula said and adding to it, people don't realize that there are multiple ways to approach someone else. You may have something in common with somebody who on the surface looks very different than you. And when you find, as I live in a very diverse but mostly Asian immigrant community as well as white. So I'm a minority because there are so many different Asian Americans in the area. And we have a great deal in common that has to do with the kinds of things we like to do, interest in types of food, who has a dog, et cetera, et cetera. And so I can be curious about them as a person. And once I have a common ground of interest on something that we share, anything that might have interfered with that is in the background because they're now a particular person who I now have a connection to. So that's kind of the change that I see happening. I mean, there's dog lover, not dog lover. There's people who feed carrots to the horses in the field and the people who think it's sweet but don't go near them. I mean, we can divide ourselves into lots of different categories because we're flexible, which gives me hope that we can talk about things that are peculiar experiences for us that come with cultural bias and societal change and our challenges. So it's hard to be hopeful, but if you get down to, well, gosh, I really don't like broccoli and I don't understand why you do. You can even have a discussion about broccoli versus cauliflower versus some other kind of vegetable. You know, there's infinite numbers of things to differentiate us and make us unique on.
Is it just me, or is there an increasing number of folks that feel like they're contrarian and they want to pick a fight on multiple topics? There might be that too. Cheryl or Barbara, Jessica, did you want to share a topic that's hard to discuss for you?
Yes.
There's no wrong answers.
Well, politics in general is difficult to discuss when you're in a group that has a lot of diverse political views. And it shows up in a lot of different ways, like even the pandemic, you know, whether you're going to get vaccinated or not, or whether you're going to wear a mask or not. It's somehow that the political statement, you know, that just taking care of your health is suddenly become a difficult thing to discuss, which is really boggles the mind. But, you know, politics, sex, race, class, you know, all those things are hard to hard to discuss.
And religions separate just as much as anything else does. People are
Wasn't that what we're
so
not supposed to talk about at dinner, was politics
right,
and religion?
right.
Yeah.
What did you think, Cheryl, Jessica?
You know, I was going to say politics as well. I live in a very diverse neighborhood and people of all colors, and our arguments are always about politics. You know, so yeah, I think our past. I think having had a president like the one that we had before the present one. It stirred up a lot of people who do use the angry words, and then I find myself kind of getting into that same kind of speech. And so I really appreciate the things that you're saying tonight, because it reminds me to pull back. You don't need to, you know, be in that conversation that way, because it never amounts to anything. It's just an argument that never gets resolved. Whereas you learn how to speak to each other and respect each other, it's probably a much better possibilities could take place.
Jessica?
Yeah, no, I'm going to go back to what Zula first brought up, which was race. And I just want to add that that I'm learning a lot. I'm learning and I'm listening. And I hear what you're saying, Zula, about I don't know even like how to say this, but that I don't understand. I know I don't understand. And I don't even know if I ever will like fully understand. However, I'm open to listening to experience. And the hardest situation that I had was right at the beginning of COVID, when we were all masked and 6 feet apart. And I had a walk with a friend of mine, an African-American woman, and she just broke down crying, and I was at a loss what to do. I couldn't hug. I didn't know, should I hug? Should I break the COVID restrictions? Should I just sit with? I just sat with her and let her have, I didn't try and fix it. I didn't, you know, but I knew that I really didn't get it. And that's hard for me. And it's hard for me to even like, I don't feel like I can be part, I can't even be part of a conversation because I don't understand. So I can't have an opinion. And I think that's just really a hard place. In addition, you know, I have my own experiences from living in suburban Walnut Creek, and it's limiting. It's just so limiting. And I think that was one of the reasons that I did get very interested in interfaith work, because it just put me right in there, right in the mix. And I could learn about other people from their own words. And I think that was helpful. And so I try to be in situations where I learn by listening. But I think those are difficult conversations to have because, like me, I don't get it. And I just haven't been exposed enough. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, what you did was perfect, just to listen.
Well, and just recognizing that you may not know how to respond is a good place to start as well.
Right.
So for the hardest topics, I
wanted to add one thing, and that is disabilities. I think many of us have invisible disabilities, and others don't necessarily recognize it. So if you aren't obviously mobility impaired, there can be questions as to why you're parking in a close to or taking a handicap spot or any of a number of things, and you don't really necessarily want to tell people what your health condition is that makes it difficult for you to walk a great distance or something else, and that can be excruciatingly awkward.
And one of the hardest things for us as humans is to recognize that we're temporarily abled, and to deal with acceptance of our own differing ability at different parts of our lives. Yeah. So for the hardest conversations, one thing that you can do is try to set boundaries for those hard conversations. And sometimes we do that with community agreements. And among those that I like the best are be present, speak for yourselves, listen to one speaker at a time. Don't yuck my yum, as you don't have to put down what I like. It's okay to not like the same things I do. Step up, step back is for those that that find themselves speaking more readily. They may want to step back. For those that are more introverted and don't speak up more readily, you may want to push yourself to step up. That might be a community agreement that tries to get more interaction. Recognizing that there's a difference between intent and impact, and especially if something that may have flown off of your own tongue and wasn't called out in other circles might now be called out, especially as more folks are doing their own race work. Folks might be using this as a way of calling people back in, just recognizing I recognize that the intent that you tried to have when you were trying to say this might have been with this intent, but the impact for me was this. And just so that you can learn from this experience, I'm going to share this with you. Others, it's okay to say oops, forgive quickly, and for others, they really want to be able to recognize when there are times where people are struggling with something, and then recognizing that we're all in this together. These community agreements can be something that encourages an attitude of curiosity or including others. Do you have a community agreement that you like using for those conversations that are a little hard yourself? Welcome, Felicity.
Hello, thanks. I'm late.
No worries. We're glad you're here. I'll give you your name back. Are there community agreements that you've used in hard conversations that have helped hard conversations have the boundaries necessary where people stay related? Yeah, Barbara.
The ones that you have, I think, are pretty good, but I'd like to point out something. I work a lot with disabled people, and they have, in several meetings that I've been in, pointed out that the words step up and step back are ableist, and that they say something like move forward or move back instead. So anyway.
Great point, great point. So making sure that the language we're using is also honorable for all people, regardless of whether we see differing abilities for them.
Okay.
I noticed that when we moved to Zoom for the Interfaith Council meetings, we needed to be really clear about that there was a time of sharing where people could speak honestly from their heart, and that was something to be listened to without judgment, and understand and honor, even if it was something that you might disagree with the interpretation. People have families and friends who are in places of conflict in the world and have a different sense of attachment and relationship and connection. And that during the time of sharing, we listen and honor, we don't judge, we don't comment. And that creates a safe container in which to have programs and talk and plan for the future. But we actually had to be pretty explicit about that in a couple of instances. Not so not so much in the meeting, but in questions that came up afterwards or in the chat, etc.
So some groups will use a talking stick for that, to make sure that everyone's turn is preserved. Hi, Nazli. We're glad that you're here. Welcome. We're talking about what community agreements we can put into place that help create boundaries that make us feel more comfortable about sharing more deeply in conversations that we're having about harder topics. And Felicity, go ahead.
When we have our meetings, it's talking stick is really good. And we usually do that like at the beginning of a meeting, and we all sit in a circle, so there's that feeling of equality, and then nobody is allowed to say anything when that person has the talking stick. And so people, when they introduce themselves and they say, hey, this is the good bit, this is the bad bit since last we met. And their idea is they're allowed kind of roughly 2 minutes, so you have to really précis it. But when it comes to some of the other bigger meetings where we're talking about policies and we're thinking about like, how do we make this go forward? We function on consensus. So nobody votes for anything. And the smallest one lonely voice has as much power as the majority. So if somebody has an objection, then that needs to be brought up. And it makes the process really slow, but it means that everybody is in agreement and nothing moves forward without that complete agreement by everyone. Does it mean people compromise? Of course, but then that's the art of negotiation. So everybody's voice is equal. Everybody else has a right to be heard, no matter how controversial. We're used to holding that sort of sacred space. We call it, for people, you're holding sacred space, meaning that it's not quite the same thing as how people say when they say safe, because people are allowed to bring up things that are controversial, but they know that what they're doing when they're bringing that in, they're bringing in the energy of whatever it is that they're doing. And when they bring in something negative, they know it's going to affect everybody else. And so because we're in the habit of it, it's hard at first when you've got a new group and you're trying to find your feet. And what does that negative look like? Because somebody's positive, maybe somebody else is negative, but the onus is on that person who's feeling the negative to speak up. But because they're given, we're consensus, they have that right. They'll have the opportunity and they'll have that right. So that's how we do it. It's hard. It's a really hard way and it's a long way to do it. But I think generally it works.
That's right. Even if you're trying to get like a super majority of 67 or 75% towards consensus can be more difficult, right, Felicity?
Yeah, right, exactly. It just means that when you come away from it, everybody's had their say. And if you end up with a few loud, like dominant voices, then they will go around the room and ask everybody to say their bit and hope that they're not intimidated. Hopefully they feel that they're in a safe place, in a sacred space to be able to make their contribution, but their contribution is equally seen as equally valid.
Thank you. Yeah, Joy.
So one of the
things... And then we're going to move back to the PowerPoint.
Okay, real quick. We are embodied creatures, and sometimes movement is very helpful. In a meeting where people are sitting around a table, I have seen a question called, and people indicated with a thumbs up that they were in favor of it, a thumb at the 9 position, that they were neutral, they could support it, they didn't have any stated objections. Straight down, no, I have an objection, I'm blocking. And that was important because putting your thumb at a 7 position meant I am against it, but I won't block it because it's not that crucial. That's a really quick way when you get to a question to visualize where you're still stuck and let that person who may not have felt comfortable speaking have the floor to articulate what their issue is. That often opens things up both on words and in concepts that people didn't know. So that 7 is really important.
That's a really important piece there, and that's especially important for large group discernment and large group conversations. To be able to have alternative ways to take the temperature of the room so that you allow the folks that are afraid to share something that hasn't been voiced yet in that space. I love this this quote: "People confuse nice and kind. Nice people don't make waves. Kind people change the world." But you can do both, right? You can empower nice and kind people to still be a part of it. And as we think about how what choices we have when we respond, it's important for us to remember that speaking with civility or not responding is a response. Sometimes walking away is the most kind thing you can do. Sometimes reframing your answer, or even reframing a question, because our explanations of things aren't always an admission of whether we agree with something or not, but even just reframing it in a way to make sure that you've heard them correctly. And here's some suggestions, and these are all inside the handout that I emailed you earlier. You must be very hurt. If someone's very agitated and expressing their anger, tell me more. Paying attention to the dynamics of racism or ideological hatred or Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, any of those things, and making sure that you're understanding where they're really coming from. It could be that they're saying something Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, but you may not know until you ask more clarifying questions. If folks are pressing us, it's okay to admit, I don't see it that way. And to share that in a non-threatening way, to help them recognize that there's greater diversity in the room, right? How do we hold love in our hearts even if we disagree with what someone is saying? What do we do when people use incorrect or demeaning terms for us? They may not even realize that it might be a part of their socialization, calling everyone in a room boys or girls, guys, those kinds of things. And how do we keep those teaching moments alive without publicly shaming folks? I think our friends in honor shame cultures, especially Asian cultures, know how to do that much better than white culture that can sometimes be very confrontational. And then, of course, each of us has a right and duty to be authentic to ourselves, and then we can be authentic to others, and we don't have to have it all figured out in advance. It's okay to ask for clarification, to disagree. So here's a great thing that I think NVC encourages us to do, and that is to check in with ourselves. How am I feeling? And let's just try it. What is the role of stress in our lives? Close your eyes and pay attention to your body. Where do you feel stress in your body? Now ask yourself that question in a different way. When I feel this stress, what story am I telling to myself or others? Are these kinds of situations always stressful, or are there times when they're not as stressful? What story do I give meaning to that stress with? Might be an interesting one. Stress and anxiety can be debilitating, and we'll talk a little bit more about why, but are there times that you find yourself counting the cost before engaging with others? If you do move into perhaps stressful conversations, what do you do to regulate the stress that you're experiencing? Because here's the danger. It's easy for us to allow our fight, flight, or freeze response to just kick in, and that's exhausting. It's there for a reason. Fight, flight, or freeze inside of our brain is there to protect our lives. It's there to protect our safety, and we shouldn't automatically just try to suppress it. But we do need to ask ourselves, are we willing to go beyond needing to be right to stay in conversation? And there might be times that we will answer that, yes, I'm willing to stay in an uncomfortable conversation in order to be able to go deeper in this conversation with this person. And there might be other times that you look at the cost for that and it doesn't work. In the book Nerve, Poise Under Pressure, Serenity Under Stress, and The Brave New Science of Fear and Cool by Taylor Clark, is this great quote: the more certainty and control we think we have about a potentially threatening situation, the less stress we will feel. Let me read that first line again. the more certainty and control we think we have about a potentially threatening situation, the less stress we will feel. Interestingly enough, perception is all that counts with this. You don't actually need to have perfect certainty or total control over how things will pan out. You just need to believe that you will have them. And this is one way that some folks are able to cope and go deeper into uncomfortable situations that might be triggering their fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we think of those times when we are responding with anger, it could be that that anger really does serve us well, but it could be that it's not serving us well. And maybe we need to ask that question. What helps us set aside anger even if we ourselves have already been victimized by the person or situation now before us? How do we express anger appropriately? Right? And our faith traditions say a lot about this as well, about when is our anger righteous and when is it not as righteous, and how do we recognize the feelings that we have as a feeling that might come and go and not intrinsically definitive of who we are as people. What do we do with our deep-seated fears in a conflicting situation? How do we respond directly to another person who has no intention of listening or even acknowledging our existence? And let's just recognize that that's an unhonoring interaction, right? And does that lead to times where we might feel out of control? How does feeling in control serve to decrease our fear? What can we do to feel comfortable while allowing others to take the lead in a conversation? This is one of the most fascinating things that I've learned in this part of the study, is how if we're able to control that level of anxiety and anger and freeze, fear, flight, or freeze response in our hypothalamus, or that part of our brain, it can actually help us control our breathing. It can help us control so much of our other response. And sometimes if we are feeling out of control, it could be that we've misunderstood something about the situation, or it could be that we've understood the situation exactly correct and we should feel out of control. And that's what other people are trying to put us in a situation. How do we retain our cool in that regard? Sometimes there are things in our culture wars that come up that kind of push our buttons on this, and some folks call this political correctness. But how do we move beyond a cable news definition of political correctness to accepting the terms others choose for themselves? How do we honor them with their pronouns, right? How do we honor or dishonor others with the language that we use for them or others? And that's especially true for people that have differing gender identities or expressions. How do we address our own racism, sexism, classism, other isms that get in our own way? Let's just recognize that that's a part that all of us need to do our own work on. And if you need to use it, we have some tools on our Interfaith Council website, including 16 pages worth of links of books and articles and movies that you can watch to do your own racial justice work, including 3 different versions of a 21-day habit-forming outline of things that you can read and learn in order to make that a habit yourself as well. But I love this quote from an Indigenous elder on Interfaith Day of Prayer, recognizing that we can be proud that you're here, unlearn some lies, and do it sincerely. And for those that experience discrimination against their religion or their culture, like Native Americans and others, that can be a powerful invitation. Going even deeper, unlearning bias is among the hardest work that we have to do, because our culture is based on settler colonialism and white supremacy. And it's not just one point of view among others. It really is an ideology of violence. And that's why I think we need to be able to use the right language for folks that are pushing dangerous ideological violence like white supremacy that says anyone who's not white isn't really a human being. We need to do our own work. We need to know the history and the connections, and we need to point out those moral equivalences when people try to use them as excuses, but we also need to be able to help others have those teaching moments that perhaps only we are ready to be able to share with them. And one way in such times of conflict is using this tool from Ellen Weber on how to disagree agreeably. using the acronym TONE, to thank, offer, nurture, and extend. Thanking people for concepts that differ from yours, offering new ideas respectfully as a benefit to all, nurture all difference to build goodwill, and extending insights through cool questions. And really, how we ask the questions is important. And this is what helps us get beyond, or really going beyond just surface relationships and going deeper, right? How do we open ourselves to others' worldviews instead of attempting to win people over to our views? How do we recognize our own confirmation bias? What lens do we see the world through? Can we describe our own lens that we see the world through, and recognize that it's our perspective and perhaps the glasses that we wear that we do see the world through? And how do we suspend judgment to hold that tension? Here's a great suggestion that you can just say to yourself in one of those harder circumstances, because it can change the way that we're responding to someone, whether we're using words or not. Just saying this internally and asking ourselves silently, would you be willing to show me the world through your eyes? And that's really important, because we do live in this very divided world. And as we looked at the way even Twitter and social media has its own Twitterverses, and Facebook has its own corners of the social media world, where people are living in very different media worlds. They're living in different news worlds. We're getting a lot of our information from different places. But when we're interacting with each other, it's like Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So using some of those internal practices so that we're not a part of other people's issues might be a part of the answer for us. And it might be a different answer in every different circumstance. And then spiritual practices are our inheritance, right? What spiritual practices do you use to train your own heart and mind? What form of meditation, prayer, breathing work best for you? Love this quote from Sri Ramakrishna Paramhansa. God can be realized through all paths. All the religions are true. The important thing is to reach the roof. You can reach it by stone stairs, or by wooden stairs, or by bamboo steps, or by a rope. And the spiritual practices we have are really spiritual technology that we can use to calm our own hearts. Our breathing, walking a labyrinth uses both sides of your brain. It's one of the few spiritual practices you can do that's a form of embodied prayer, so that you can know something in your body as well as in your mind. And there is a certain form of knowledge that we have, that we do know emotional intelligence as well as intellectual intelligence. But when we use these spiritual practices, they really do create in us the calm that we may be seeking in the moment, even in the midst of potential conflict. And they have real world opportunities for us to be able to train our own hearts, minds, and breathing in this. This is a great little introductory video from Scientific American about meditation.
Researchers have known for decades that meditation can improve someone's physical and mental health. It can relieve stress, lower blood pressure, and lift someone's mood. But only in the last 10 years have neuroscientists taken a serious look at the changes in brain structure underlying some of meditation's benefits. Like everything else we do, meditation rewires our neural circuits, pruning away the least used connections and strengthening the ones we exercise most. Studies looking for signs of these changes usually focus on mindfulness meditation, which challenges people to keep their attention fixed on their thoughts and sensations in the present moment. Scientists acknowledge that many of these studies are small and not ideally designed, but at this point, researchers have gathered enough evidence to be confident that their findings are not just flukes. Experiments suggest that Buddhist monks have really robust connections between scattered regions of their brains, which allows for more synchronized communication. Expert meditators also seem to develop an especially wrinkly cortex, the brain's outer layer. We depend on the cortex for many of our most sophisticated mental abilities, like abstract thought and introspection. Several studies have confirmed that meditation can increase the volume and density of the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped area of the brain in the middle of the skull that is absolutely crucial for memory. And although areas of the brain responsible for sustaining attention usually shrink as we age, meditation counteracts this decay. An increasing number of studies show that meditating for as little as 12 to 20 minutes a day for several weeks can sharpen the mind. In these studies, meditators have scored higher on tests of attention and working memory, which is the ability to temporarily store and manipulate information in one's mind. Some lifelong meditators in their 50s and 60s can even outperform 20-somethings on tests of visual attention. So if you're interested in trying meditation, you should probably start as soon as possible. For Scientific American's Instant Egghead, I'm Ferris Jaber.
Interesting info. The Institute of Noetic Sciences in Nevada has done some studies on the difference between Buddhist people in monasteries and nuns inside monasteries, and they have very similar brain structure in the way that they're connecting in their ability to offer empathy and compassion is even increased by their ability and the amount of meditation that they're doing on a regular basis. But of course, even our faith traditions give us the encouragement to keep moving forward, like this from the Talmud based on Isaiah 6 or Micah 6:8. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And of course, there's professional conflict management for the hardest kinds of conversations. And there's times when you might need a religious counselor, and sometimes your rabbi, imam, priest, or pastor might be able to give you some short-term counseling for individuals, families, and couples. But oftentimes they'll refer folks to a trained therapist after some initial visits, where if the needs are greater than their own training. So just recognizing that there's always help out there from professionals when you need it is an important piece as well. There's also some great peacemaking curriculums that are out there, and one of them that I found a few years ago is called Gen Mindful, and it's an interesting set of games for people, especially for parents and children, making a connection to a ritual and creating a new ritual with these card pulls, where you can encourage your children every morning talking about the card that they pull, making that the focus for their day, involving the children using cards as a way of creating a different way of doing a timeout or being present and playful in the middle as well. And so here's a little bit about this Gen Mindful piece as well.
So one of the things I love about Peacemakers is it supports this idea that we need to teach children social emotional skills. For children to be truly successful, it's more than academic skills. They need to have emotional intelligence.
When you have a tool like this, it is really sort of like having your own psychoanalytical therapist in a box.
What I love about the cards is you actually have to stop what you're doing, get the cards, and in doing just that, you're stopping that hamster wheel way that we live. And then you're connecting with your child.
The number one thing that parents come to me with are concerns about emotions. My child is out of control. My child is melting down. I can't get my child to listen or to cooperate. So the magic of Peacemakers really lies in three things: connection, focus, and play. Peacemakers help children learn to listen and to cooperate. And how do we do that?
I am safe and secure. Who do you feel safe with?
It's safe to be with Mom and Dad. I am adaptable, let's move and dance. share my ideas and my feelings.
Each person is special in their own ways. I'm the oldest of the family, so I lead my brothers, I hope, in the right path.
Life is all about connections. Whether you're a child connecting to a new idea, an adult connecting to your child, or a teacher connecting to your class, we need to find space and honor those spaces to connect for those little moments that life is all about.
Peacemakers help us slow down, to stop, to listen, to share,
to connect in the little moments.
Connection and play is a big piece for that. There's another curriculum that was written to even complement school curriculums called Nurturing Healing Love, A Mother's Journey of Hope and Forgiveness by Scarlett Lewis. Her son was one of the kids killed at Sandy Hook. In writing the book, she found some peace and began to believe that choosing love was the key to creating a healthy, safe, and happy world. And her story is so powerful.
If anyone knows the anguish of a mass shooting, it's Scarlett Lewis. She lost her precious 6-year-old son, Jesse, at the Sandy Hook school massacre that shocked the nation 3 years ago this month. The San Bernardino massacre is the worst mass shooting in America since Sandy Hook. It's heartbreaking to look at home video of a little boy who had so much life to live. Today, Scarlett says she has found a new reason to live. Through 3 words her son wrote on a kitchen chalkboard.
You see it right here, nurturing here, healing, love.
I found my purpose in life, and that is to spread the message of nurturing, healing, love. Jesse had an old soul, and despite his tender years, he seemed to know that choosing to love in all we do makes the world a better place.
Scarlett has written a book based on those 3 words that she feels were divinely left for her.
I felt like I had been passed a torch to spread just a beautiful message out into the world, and one that we need so desperately in these times.
Scarlett says getting over her son's death has been a long process, but she says she's in a better place today.
Everybody's heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, but in reality, the majority of us actually experience post-traumatic growth after a tragedy. You find the strength that you never knew that you had. We just feel like we're with Jesse and all of his things in his bedroom.
Jesse's room is now a tribute to him. He loved little rubber ducks lined along the fireplace mantle. Now Scarlett is determined to spread Jesse's message of love.
My son Jesse reached out from heaven to give me signs that he's still with me every minute of every day.
So here's a curriculum that she helped write for every grade, kids and teens, especially based on values of love, belonging, self-confidence, self-control, ethics, social responsibility, and control, and just encouraging folks to be able to complement the school curriculum of reading, writing, and arithmetic with the also necessary aspects of learning about how to interrelate with other folks. Some congregations are using this curriculum to complement their Sunday school curriculum. We did a whole retreat on compassion for 8 retreats for a year, and we went through different ones of these 12 chapters in this book, the 12 Steps to a Life, Compassionate Life, with Dr. Karen Armstrong, who helped start the Charter of Compassion. And we were able to really go deeper into each of these topics, learning about compassion, our own world, compassion for ourselves, empathy, mindfulness, action, how little we know of others, how we should speak to one another, concern for everyone, knowledge, recognition, and even loving enemies. And here's a short video.
A television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like to tell me?
I like you.
I like you, my dear. Thank you very much for telling me that. You take all of the elements that make good television and do the exact opposite. You have Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Low production values, simple set, unlikely star. Yet, it worked.
Hello. I've always felt that I didn't need to put on a funny hat or jump through the hoop to have a relationship with a child.
He was always trying to get a message across in every show.
A week on death.
What does assassination mean?
On divorce.
Some people get married, and after a while, they're so unhappy that they don't want to be married anymore.
He was radical. I know everyone says that, but he was radical.
They didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
A neighborhood was a place where, at times that you felt worried, scared, unsafe, would take care of you.
He had a singular vision of kindness and love.
Love is at the root of everything. All learning, all relationships, love or the lack of it. Children have very deep feelings, just the way everybody does. There must be times when you do feel blue. I'm not feeling blue right now, though.
Me neither.
Won't you be my neighbor? Well, I suppose it's an invitation. It's an invitation for somebody to be close to you. The greatest thing that we can do is to help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. Won't you please, please won't you be my neighbor?
Some of you grew up with Mr. Rogers. I didn't know he was a Presbyterian minister until I went to Presbyterian seminary, but love or the lack of it is so central to what he created in his schools, or his TV, especially recreating neighborhood connections, which I think is what we're invited to do right now. And that's not always easy because it means that we try to stay in relationship with others and not just retreat away. It's easier to stay in our own home and not to be with others, especially people that think differently for us or from us. It's difficult to speak up and connect with those being targeted and to use our privilege to be there for others. And it's difficult to listen deeply to people who think differently than we do, or to even share our heart for equality and interconnectivity. So rebuilding the common good is really the work of the interfaith councils in the world. This is our work, is to learn how to do this dialogue and to recognize, to expect diversity rather than put up with it. So it's learning the skills of being purposefully present in public places, building connections with others that we may not even know until we risk sharing ourselves, and seeking that common ground, ways of working together and throwing a party. Be creative, right? Whatever words we utter should be chosen with care, for people will hear them and be influenced by them for good or ill. So again, the question is, what will you do next? This was the question we ended our last presentation with, and one of the ways that we tried to live into this a few years ago was creating this image, carrying Contra Costa, to create a new campaign to encourage not just our congregations but members of the whole community to host a program that builds caring and kindness, and then to actually do work with other people. So our new I Care program is actually putting this into action by encouraging at least 2 congregations or more to come together to do their volunteering together, whether they're supporting another agency here in the county or working to help those that are living without shelter or the hungry or those that are in need, and really building in those relationships as you're doing your service with others, so that we are building a more caring, kind, and compassionate Contra Costa County. But this is true regardless of where we live, right? We had a different theme for each month as we did this. We sent out ideas beforehand for folks to think about different ways of being caring and kind, and highlighting ways to inspire others with that. But we can also be there ready to bear witness and to protect each other's rights and dignity, whether that's standing in solidarity. Sometimes we've done that in Walnut Creek at Civic in North Broadway, or in Civic Park in in Walnut Creek, but the Neighbor to Neighbor, which is one of our regional clusters here inside Contra Costa in the La Marinda neighborhood, actually purchased large versions of this poster, gave it to a bunch of members in all of their congregations at Lafayette Aranda Presbyterian Church and Temple Isaiah and the Islamic Center of San Ramon Valley. And people put this in their windows as a way of sharing their sign of solidarity and showing up for others, right? Especially those that are being persecuted. And I mentioned last time that we had over 500 people come together after the Islamophobia at the Islamic Center of the East Bay in Antioch after their building was burned down. But it's true, even if things happen like the Oak Creek Massacre in Wisconsin, where there was a shooting inside of a Sikh temple, or if we need to stand in solidarity after a Muslim ban, or even public policies that are targeting any of our faith traditions. I know that we've done a few statements, and Joy, I was hoping that this time you would talk about a few of the statements that the Tri-City Interfaith Council has put together for us to be able to just recognize how our public statements can sometimes be helpful.
So we've had a history, thank you, Will. We've had, Tri-City Interfaith Council has had, up until the pandemic, for a couple of years, we had monthly vigils on a main street corner in Fremont. The unifying theme was "We Are One," and every month it was an issue was chosen and signs made for that in particular, but it was always under the unifying witness of "We Are One," so that people got a sense that there were many, many issues that could divide people but did not have to. And those brought a lot of people from various faith communities together and in interaction. We also have several that are on our website, that we haven't issued any recently. That we tend to keep ours focused very locally on the communities of Fremont, Union City, and Newark, California. We did write something earlier in the year about someone finding a hate symbol on the local Reform synagogue and standing in solidarity with that. We've held vigils in Central Park in Fremont when there have been shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and in solidarity with the Muslim community when there was the killing in Christchurch, New Zealand, which brought a number of people together. And I was extremely moved by that one because there were people from Muslim communities that I rarely see in public, in full, in their appropriate garbs for their particular manifestation of their faith, who were just overcome with the fact that people who were not from their community would stand with them in public. And it gave me a real sense of what it means to be a neighbor to someone who does not believe as others in the community do. And I know there are several of the independent congregations. Barbara's from the Unitarians are very active in this within the congregation as well. So there's several congregations that tend to encourage, support, and provide some of the leadership and training for others, and bring people from other communities who their whole community isn't on board yet, but they are personally committed, and that in itself is something that builds a connection and creates a space and solidarity for others to step forward, which is really good.
Thank you, Joy. So that's the end of the presentation portion. Now's the idea here's our time for us to share some of our ideas about how you might go a little deeper in your own peacemaking work, and listening to understand rather than to respond, which really will be the interfaith skills that we're teaching in our next program, August 18th, with the Courageous Conversations. And I'd love to hear if any of you have a story you'd like to share for that as well. But let's go ahead and share any responses to what you've heard tonight, and maybe a time when you've gone a little deeper than you thought possible.
I liked the thing about unlearning the lies that was on the indigenous, because it's true. I mean, it's true of everything. I mean, that's how we judge genders. That's how we judge races. That's how we judge. I mean, it's all that what we have been taught, and what we've been taught is lies.
Uh-oh, Zula, you went mute, so we missed some of your wisdom there.
So we need to start asking questions and stop making assumptions that we know what that person thinks or eats or whatever by the way they're dressing or by the way they look or I mean, anything. We needed to start asking questions because it's all lies.
That was one of the things that Felicity's faith tradition taught me. The pagan community definitely taught me not to assume that you know what another person believes, especially based on whatever categories that they use for themselves.
I had some value then.
Could I share something on what Zula was saying about being taught and being in the lies? My dad tells me stories about things that happened to him, and when he was little and just entering school for the first time in kindergarten, his family had just moved, and they moved into a neighborhood that apparently was a segregated neighborhood, and they entered him into school, and he did not realize he was in school for a week before they called him into the office and told him that they had to move him because he was in a black school. They had to put him in a white school. And this was in Nebraska, of course, a long time ago. But we have to remember that the things that have been taught to us for a very long time. This whole segregation thing, was something that they forced on people. You know, my dad preferred to stay in the school he was at. He had friends and he didn't care what color their skin was. So so there's that whole aspect to consider in there. Thanks.
It also bleeds out. I mean, like Black Lives Matter to me was just, they started a huge thing, and it's rippling out into everything. Because I mean, it's all, anything that divides us is just not good.
You know, and in fact, schools are still segregated in a way, because a school is somehow funded differently based on the neighborhood that you come from.
Yes. Yes.
So I got involved in some things that were happening in our city when one of the schools that's from a lower income neighborhood. In fact, it was the neighborhood I grew up in for the first 10 years of my life. And they made a comment that the kids who are mostly Hispanic didn't need air conditioning because of obvious reasons, where the kids from the other side of the town, definitely they need the air conditioning, and they actually were going to make that decision until we made a really big deal about that comment. And that board member actually eventually removed herself from the board for saying that. But people do say horrific things for no reason whatsoever. It had nothing to do with skin color, whether you could stay in a hot school, elementary school or not. So, but it did point the picture, the arrow to the school district, that every school has to be treated the same. And we don't care how much money is in that neighborhood and where those kids live, but every single school needs to get computers at the same time, because they actually did that in our city. That neighborhood on the other side of town, they had computers in those schools 3 years before they started giving them to the other schools. And then they wondered why the test scores are so low in those other schools. So this is an equity factor that we need to really, really push to make sure our boards are not discriminating.
Yes. And, you know, I would like to say one thing about that woman who said what she said. She said that because that's what she knows. You know, so when people say those things, those are the people that need help. They're not people that we need to hate or judge. We need to just help them to see that there's other ways of looking at things.
It's interesting that comes up with some of the issues around medical care even. And some doctors believe that Black people didn't experience pain the same way white people did. I know. As if white people had experienced pain more rather than the same. So sometimes that socialization and that discrimination can become very pernicious. Barbara, were you going to say something?
Yeah, you said that, I think you said that you were going to be talking about how to listen in upcoming meeting. And I've been involved in an organization called Sidewalk Talk for a number of years, where we sit on sidewalks with a sign saying free listening here today, and to listen to anybody who walks by. So I'd be happy to share that story, you know, whenever you have that part of your lesson.
That would be great. And if you're available next week, why don't you just plan on staying on the call a little bit afterward? And if there's anyone else interested in telling a story in our next program, stay a little bit after we've stopped the recording, and we'll talk more about being prepared for that August 18th, which is the next program called Courageous Conversations, and we'll be learning more about compassionate listening.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other responses that you'd like to share?
I know that when we were having discussions, there was one slide, it said, oh, you must be feeling this, that you had up. And I was like, it kind of jarred a little. And I was thinking, why is that? Okay, so because I don't know what they're thinking. I can't possibly know what they're thinking. I can make assumptions about, but I don't want to make assumptions, because that's not my right to make an assumption. And then it reminded me of a way that we, in one of the little groups I was in, would have conversations about, trying to think about the way to put it. And it would be, I don't know, I think we were discussing about something, and then it would create a feeling. And then what we would do is describe the practical details without the feeling. And then other people would say, well, if I'd experienced that, they made a bazillion I statements. Well, if I'd experienced that, I think I would be feeling this. Is that something that you felt too? So that you're not actually telling them what they're thinking, but you're also giving them an opportunity in language, especially with children who don't know all the words to say, rather than sort of project onto them what you're thinking. Say, well, I think I would be feeling like this. And then somebody else will say, well, actually, I was feeling something quite different. I was feeling this from your description. And then that gives the other person, oh, yeah, she was a little bit of that and a little bit of that. Or no, that was absolutely not what I felt. But that way, it's sort of almost, it gives people language to be able to say. And it gives you an opportunity to find empathy. And because sometimes you can have different ways that people are feeling, you know, it builds perspective. You know, everybody's entitled to their perspective. That's my thinking. But yeah, that was an interesting thing. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, I just recently met, and I'm sorry if you guys know this, but 4-minute stare for building empathy. And there's a psychologist in New York developed it, Aaron something. And I recently came across it in a completely bizarre reference, which I won't give. But anyway, the thing is that if you go on YouTube and do 4-minute stare, there's Amnesty International has used this, and people just literally sit and stare at each other's eyes for 4 minutes, like two people opposite each other, sitting down, stare for 4 minutes, not allowed to speak. And the emotions that come up are huge. The program that this was in the middle of, it was about a young man who was from Florida, who was very anti-immigration. And the rest of the program is weird and wonderful, which I love. But what the guy was trying to do was try to get him to have empathy. And he placed him opposite somebody who very much had the sort of, you know, those beautiful angular features of peoples who are indigenous to, like, Mexico or further south, and, you know, those beautiful noses and chins. And this guy, right, so he's totally racist, saying that none of the Hispanic people should be in Florida, was sitting opposite this guy. And in this 4-minute stare, he cried. He cried and cried and cried. And that alone, let alone the rest of the program, radically changed the way that he felt about immigrants, and he said he had to go home and just readjust all of his thoughts about everything. And I thought, wow, that's powerful. That's really incredible. So that's something that maybe that, I don't know if you could ever do that in any situation, but that would be a great thing to do. And I love that idea of what the previous person said about having opportunities to sit and listen. We just sit and listen. People just want to be heard, want to be acknowledged. It's not about solving them. It's just about hearing them and having that connection. That's beautiful. I love that idea.
So Felicity, are you saying that the person that expressed their feelings actually helped the other person understand the plight that they live with as an immigrant?
Oh, the one with the 4-minute stare discussion, the guy, no, when they did the 4-minute stare, he was just staring at this chap who was not Caucasian. They didn't say anything at all. And this guy just ends up in floods of tears, and they have a big hug at the end of it. And I mean, there was a whole load more else to the program, but this was. But
he could recognize the other person's humanity by looking into their eyes.
Absolutely, I think.
Wow.
And I should imagine that a lot of guilt went on. You know, I'm supposed to hate you, and here you are sitting in the same room as me, and I'm staring at you. Probably, I would love to hear what went through his mind. But it was pretty cool.
Would we have a different conversation around immigration in this country if we realized that most of the people that are coming to our southern border are coming because of this 8-year drought in the Northern Triangle of Central America?
Wow.
Do we realize that they're eco-refugees, or do we think that they're just coming to take our jobs or
steal our jobs?
Yeah.
Make their life better? Most of them are coming here because they don't have a way to feed their family anymore, because climate change has advanced so far in the tropics that they're in the midst of a drought in a tropical rainforest.
And most of the people, I mean, I don't know what the percentage would be, 90-something% of the people in this country are immigrants. I mean, the indigenous people and the slaves were brought here, whatever kind of slave they were. The rest of the people came from somewhere else, voluntarily, unless they're refugees.
Yeah. So we've got a minute left. Is there any other wisdom that we would like to share before we turn the record off and talk more about next time?
I'm struck by the fact that at the heart of what everybody has said tonight is the need to realize that anybody you're dealing with or talking to is a person. They are both unique and they are like you. And that tension is present with any person. And the only way we can make them other is to see them as so different than ourselves that they aren't really a person.
So true, and we don't often recognize their humanity until we know that they are going through very similar things than we are.
Or we're working with them towards a common objective, and in the course of that working, we learn more about them, we learn to depend on them, we have experiences together, we laugh, we've shared a meal, and that is in itself builds the connection.
Amen, and we'll end with that word. Thank you, Joy. Have a great week, and we'll see you on August 18th for our Courageous Conversations, Learning Compassionate Listening Skills.